Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We generally do a couple of webinars a month. Sometimes they're an overview done by our sales department for those people that are either very new to ClubExpress or are considering ClubExpress as an association management solution. But most of our webinars are about particular bits of functionality, modules or things that a particular role might do. Webinars, say, for treasurers or for member managers and such. And today we're going to be doing one that's going to touch on some of the cool things that you can do with events, because most of our clubs and associations use events of some sort. And we've got quick events, we've got single activity events, and we've got multi-activity events. And so Samantha is going to be showing you some of the things that you can do with multi-activity events. But let's take care of a little bit of housekeeping first. All of the phones and microphones are muted, so questions should be entered into the chat window. After Samantha's demo, we will revisit the chat window to see if there are any questions that had not already been answered during the demo. And so this is particularly useful for those people viewing a recording of this session. And speaking of recording, all of our recordings for webinars and for video tutorials are available on clubexpress.com. And the way you get to them is you click on the cool stuff link at the top, then you click on the webinars link at the lower left, and there's a list of the upcoming webinars, and then below that are the recorded webinars. You can also click on the video tutorials, which is right above the webinars tab, so you can see the recently published video tutorials, and all of this is also available for within the help system. And all of our videos are actually stored on YouTube, so you can get to them there also just by searching for ClubExpress. And what we'd appreciate you doing is subscribing. If you subscribe, you can click on the little bell icon that appears so you can be notified of new content as it gets published. And finally, if you're using ClubExpress, and particularly if you like using ClubExpress and it's working really well for your organization, we'd appreciate it if you would go to clubexpress.com/reviews and click on one of these review sites and give a review of ClubExpress so others who are evaluating association management solutions can have the benefit of how ClubExpress is working for you and your organization. Today, Samantha is going to be talking about multi-activity events.
Thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. Today is a really exciting webinar. It's going to cover one of our more robust topics, which is creating a multi-activity event. So first we'll start with what is a multi-activity event. A single activity event is something that's one activity over the course of a day, like a lunch and learn, or a single activity that covers several days, like a monthly committee meeting or an 8-week rowing class, something along those lines. A multiple activity event is one that can take place over either one or more days and consists of more than one item or activity during that event. So for example, a family fun weekend that has a barbecue, a kids crafting time, a cocktail hour for parents, or for professional organizations, it's a conference, convention, trade show where each day has a breakfast and breakout sessions and a networking event during each evening. So a multiple activity event can be used for something other than an activity on your ClubExpress site. So for example, if you want to give people the option to buy a t-shirt, you can configure the individual activity as an item that people select when registering, because all of those activities and items that are part of that multiple activity event are things which are selected when someone registers. And we're going to show you how to do both of those today. So what are the differences between a single activity event and a multiple activity event? Multiple activity events are largely the same as a regular event when it comes to configuring the details, with a few important and helpful differences. For today's webinar, I'm going to assume that you have at least configured a single activity event. So aside from the things which are exclusive or helpful to multiple activity events, I'm not going to go into a crazy amount of detail when creating the event. We'll of course go through every panel, but what we're focusing on today is what you need to know to configure a multiple activity event. So each multiple activity event has its own registrations. When someone is registering for your conference convention as a whole, they're selecting the items that they're attending on an individual basis. You can see everyone who has registered for those individual activities or everyone who has elected to purchase or add those individual items to their registration. There are also individual reports for each activity. Each activity can also have its own location. So if you're hosting an event at a hotel, you might rent out a ballroom and then several conference rooms for seminars or breakout sessions. So you can make sure that your members and even non-members know where to go for every single activity that they've registered for. Registration and fees and who can register. Those are both things that you're used to configuring for an event as a whole, but are configured individually for each activity. So each activity has its own registration details, and each activity has its own who can register screen. So you can have certain activities that are available to members and non-members, and other activities that are available to members only. The same way that you can create separate fees for members and non-members in a single activity event, you can do the exact same thing for multiple activity events, just on an individual activity level. You can also set waitlist inclusion per activity. Now, I'm not going to go into, again, a crazy amount of detail on waitlists because we did do a webinar on event waitlists a couple of weeks ago. That webinar is available on our YouTube channel, and we talk about waitlists and how they differ between a single activity and a multiple activity event. So today's session, again, is just going to be configuring that multiple activity event. And then the last thing that is a little bit different, you're used to configuring questions for an event as a whole, but you can actually ask separate questions for each activity. So if you have somebody who's registering for a dinner, you can ask questions about food allergies. If you have a seminar on one particular topic, you can ask people how familiar they are with that topic. You can ask people if they've been to other seminars that you've hosted, perhaps. So in today's demonstration, we are going to focus again on the details of creating a multiple activity event. We're going to help our members using event contact responsibilities, set our list of who can register for the event, create those individual activities, and talk about required activities versus optional activities, configure separate costs and locations, add a couple of items. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of registering for a multiple activity event as a member. Now, I am logged in to the Northwest Balloon Club as Martin Smith. Martin Smith is the administrator. And to save a little bit of time, I have already set up a multiple activity event that's occurring in July. It's our Summer Safety Jamboree. So I'm going to go into this event, into my admin options, and I'm going to start taking a look at the panels. We're going to go through very quickly some of the panels that don't really have a lot of differences. And so again, we can focus our time on configuring those activities. So the first stop that you make when you add an event is your basic information page. And that's true for either a single activity or a multiple activity event. And the basic information is going to be the same. Now, the main difference that I want to show you is going to be back on our Events Manager page. When you're adding an event, at the very top, you may not have touched this configuration if all you've been creating are single activity events, because that is the activity mode that's selected by default, is single activity at the very top of the basic information screen. When you configure it as a multiple activity event, at the very bottom where you're seeing those event creation panels that we have set up for you, one that's selected by default is more than one activity that people attend. Now, of course, in the same way that you have the ability to select the panels that you want to see when creating a single activity event, you have that ability with a multiple activity event. The only difference is that now your more than one activity panel is selected by default because you're configuring a multiple activity event. So on your basic information page, that's the only difference. First, setting up your event as a multiple activity event. So let's go back into our events screen here, and we'll go back into that Summer Safety Jamboree. So within my basic information, I've just created my short description, I've created my date range, I've selected the items that I want to see. Again, all of this information is going to be largely the same. My formatted description, again, it's going to function the exact same way as it would for a single activity event. So we won't spend too much time on this. Event context is one of the first stops that I want to make to stress something that would be really helpful for you when you're creating a multiple activity event. In the same way that you might have multiple event contexts for even a single activity event, where one person is responsible for registration and another person is responsible for maybe setting up a guest speaker that you're having, you have a lot of responsibility as an organization to make things easy for your members, especially if you're hosting a multi-day, multi-activity event and your member just has a question about something really simple. Don't make them search for who they need to contact for that item. And even for your event helpers, for your event contacts, make their jobs easier by making sure they're not getting questions about things that they're not responsible for. So really use event contacts, even for single activity events, but most importantly for multiple activity events. So for this particular Summer Safety Jamboree, this is an annual summer event that the Northwest Balloon Club hosts. It's a family weekend. It's a weekend to get members up to speed on new things happening in ballooning. There are breakout sessions that have seminars. There are concurrent sessions that have kids events. So members who are attending a safety seminar have somewhere to put their kids for the duration of that event. We also have a barbecue. We have a couple of dining options. We're giving out t-shirts. We have a different person who's responsible for every single one of those items. So when your member has a question just about children's activities, they know exactly who to contact. They're not contacting the wrong person. They're not wasting time. They get the answers they need. They get them quickly. Next up, location. Now, I mentioned before that your event activities can each have their own location. So even if you're hosting an event at a giant open field, maybe a forest preserve, you might have a couple of different areas set up for different activities. Or again, if you're hosting a convention at a hotel, you might have the ballroom for your general meet and greet, but you have different meeting rooms available for seminars and breakout sessions. Your top level location is sort of the general location. When you're configuring individual activities, you add those individual locations, or you can keep it as the same location. Next up, our registration and fees page. Our registration and fees page, again, largely the same as our single activity event registration and fees page, with a couple of differences. So now at the very top, of course, we've said that registration is required. We've set our registration open date. You're still configuring all of those options, but one thing that you don't configure is capacity, because that's set at the individual activity level. So in this example, we're allowing 150 people to attend the entire event, but we can even set capacity for each activity as more limited than the entire event itself. And I'll show you one way to do that when we're configuring our activities. We're also allowing guests. So again, at the high level for that activity, you state how many guests a registrant can bring, whether immediate payment is required, whether there's even a fee that's involved for this event at all. Your non-member settings, what information you want to collect. Again, all of this is going to be largely the same as a single activity event. The only difference is that some of those settings are being configured at the individual activity level. Next up, who can register and what are they paying? Now, when you're creating a single activity event, this is where you list your registrant types. So whether you're allowing members and non-members to register, if they can bring guests, if there's a separate fee for a non-member versus a member. But here you'll notice that you're not actually configuring a fee, even though we said that a fee is required for this event back on our registration details page. That's because you're configuring those fees, again, on the individual activity level. In the case where you have an event where there's a general fee to attend and register, you create an item in the activities page, which of course we'll go through. So for example, for this jamboree, there's a $20 fee just to attend the jamboree. even if you're not participating in the seminars. Just like if you were attending a conference, there's just a general fee to attend the entire conference, and then you might pay a little bit extra to attend a dinner or to attend a group outing that they might be taking. The types of registrants here that you add determine who you can allow to attend each activity. All this page does is pare down the list that you see for each individual activity. You're creating a master list, if you will. So I have only allowed active members, member guests, another non-member or another person in their membership to register for this event and any activities associated with it. So while normally you see a very large list of types of people that you can allow to register, when I go into my individual activities, I'm only going to see the types that I've added on this top level screen. So in this case, I'm allowing active members to register for this event. Any secondary or tertiary people in their membership, I'm also allowing them to add them to their registration. And then any non-members, because, you know, if I'm making this a family weekend, perhaps our secondary and primary members don't have any children in their membership, but I still want them to be able to bring their children to this event. So I'm allowing them to still bring non-members.
Samantha, one thing that's worth mentioning here, and I'll pop in from time to time, is that you can edit any one of these lines. So where it says member guest another person in your membership, you could just rename that to member family or my family or something like that. Now, so this way, when people are looking at the list, it makes sense to them.
Absolutely. And so we'll go ahead and update that, and we'll save our changes. Now the next option is going to be more than one activity that people can attend or items that people purchase. Now this is where you're going to spend most of your time when you're configuring your multiple activity event. These are the activities that you're actually configuring. They're also items that you're configuring. Now I've taken the liberty in the essence of time to configure a handful, but we're still going to configure an item and an activity from scratch so you can see that process from the start. As I stated before, I have a general fee just to attend this particular event, aside from the add-ons that people can register for and pay for. That's this top item that I've created here, my Northwest Balloon Club Summer Safety Jamboree General Attendance. And you'll see that in the type column, every one of these is an activity except for the first. I've configured this as an item. Now the difference being, all of your activities are things which our system recognizes as having a start and a stop time. So for example, the ice cream social starts at 2, the burner safety seminar starts at 5, etc. All of those are activities that start at a certain time, whereas items are just things that are being added to the registration. It could be your general attendance fee. It could be a t-shirt or a keychain or a badge. And then in the maintain column, you'll see all of those individual items that we were talking about at the very beginning of being things that you set on an individual activity or item level. So first we have registrations. We can see anyone who has signed up for that item or activity. We have reports available. We have our basic information. We have a location. Again, this is something that is exclusive to an activity. An item does not have a location. We have our registration and fees screen, our who can register screen where we set the types of members and non-members that can register, as well as the fee if there is one, and individual questions that you can ask people per activity. So let's take a look at the first item here, which is our general attendance. I'm going to take a look at the basic information. And again, you'll see that this is just a title and description. I'm not configuring a date or a time because this is something that someone is going to have applied to their registration. Next up, registration and fees. Now, the first item is one that can be a little bit confusing. However, it isn't when you actually think about it. You have 3 options to choose from as far as making this item optional or mandatory when someone's going through and registering. The first is not selected. If you choose not selected, it means that the item is not selected automatically when a member goes in to register. They have the option to select it on their own. Selected means that the item is selected when that member registers by default, but they have the option to uncheck that box. And the last is selected and required, meaning that this item will be selected from the list of items and activities by default when a member goes to register, and it cannot be unselected. So it would be a required activity or item. In this case, I want that general fee to be applied to every registration. I want the member to have to pay that fee when they register for this event. It's not an option for them to pay it, and they're not able to uncheck that box. Again, it's required. Next up, sequence numbers. We're all familiar with sequence numbers and what they mean. We'll talk a little bit more about how that might apply to an activity or item in another example. Item quantities. I only want people to be able to select one of these general attendance fees per registrant, simply because it's just a general attendance fee. It's not something like a t-shirt. If you were giving away something like a t-shirt or a mug or a keychain or even a brochure, you might want them to be able to purchase or add more than one to their registration. In this case, they only need to add one. And here is where we're going to set capacity. Now, I talked about how each individual activity or item can have a set capacity. This is my overall general attendance. It's going to be required of every single person who registers for this particular event. So this is where I can set my top level event capacity. Now, if you're not charging a fee for the entire event, you're only charging fees for individual activities, you can still select this item and require it, so that you know how many people are registering and when you've hit capacity, but just not charge a fee. They'd still have to select it. They'd still show up on sort of a master registration list that you've configured for yourself, but there wouldn't be a fee. In this case, however, I am charging that nominal fee. I'm not charging a different fee after a date, and of course the accounting information that you're familiar with seeing with sales tax, financial account, etc. So let's cancel out of this and go back to my original screen. And let's take a look at who can actually register for the general attendance. So you can see here that pared down list that we were talking about. When we were configuring the who can register screen at the top level, we were creating a pared down list of registrant types that we then use in each individual activity. Here, I've configured it to where only active members are actually paying for this particular event, whereas their family and their children are free.
You may want to change that third one just to member guest or something like that, because you've got family children twice.
Oh, that has to be done back on the,
on the other screen.
Register screen, yeah. Next up, we have the Welcome Ice Cream Social. This is an activity that I created as an event coordinator, which is designed to get people to check in to my event nice and early. I want everybody there on the first day. As an incentive, when I configured my basic information for this activity, again, not an item, it's an activity, I've created a time, and I've even said that they get a complimentary ice cream treat when they check in early, and they get entered into a raffle to win a Northwest Balloon Club mug. So on the first day, check-in starts at 2, ends at 4. Again, because it's an activity, I choose my date and time, whereas with an item, there isn't a set date and time. It's just something that is added or not added to the registration. So let's take a look at our registration details for this particular event. At the very top, this activity is not going to be selected by default. It's something that the member can choose to participate in, but it's not required. But again, because I'm offering that raffle for the mug, I want to track sequence numbers. These sequence numbers can be used to create just a list of numbers that you can choose randomly to choose the winner of your mug. That's one of the uses that you have for sequence numbers for a raffle that you might be choosing at an event. And we're not focusing on single activity events here, but sequence numbers is something that you can configure at a single activity event as well. Capacity. Because this is check-in, I'm going to assume, perhaps optimistically, that everyone that's registered for the event is going to check in on this particular day. I'm going to set capacity at 150. Also, because that's just how much ice cream I plan on purchasing. Is registration required? Yes, but I'm not going to charge a fee for this activity. And next up, who can register? Again, there isn't a fee being charged, but I am allowing all of those registrant types to be able to sign up. So that allows me to see how many people are actually coming, how much ice cream do I think I need. Perhaps I can maybe even separate it by looking at how many family members are coming versus how many members are coming. And
Samantha, could you just go over the sequence numbers? Someone's asking, can you go
sure.
over the sequence numbers again?
So sequence numbers are numbers that can be assigned to every single registrant registering for either an event or an activity. And in this particular case, I have assigned sequence numbers for this particular item or activity. You can start with any number that you'd like. And it's because I plan on taking everyone who has actually checked in or everyone who has registered for this particular item. I'm going to pull a random number which comes from registration out of a hat and see who corresponds with that particular number, and that's the person that wins that mug. So the last thing with our Welcome Ice Cream Social would be our location. This particular item has the same location as our event as a whole. So this is being held at our club airfield, and the check-in desk is going to be at the airfield itself. Now let's take a look at a couple of events that we have running concurrently. We have burner safety updates and a kids crafting event. Now, again, I mentioned that I'm running safety seminars, but I also want a place for members to be able to put their kids so that they can actually attend this event, but still keep it as a family event. So I have two activities running at the exact same time on that Friday, both running at 5 p.m. If we take a look at the location for burner safety, it's not being held at the same location. It's being held at a different location. This is being held at the clubhouse. So when someone registers for this particular activity within the event, they can see that the location is a little bit different. And if we take a look at the location for the kids crafting event, it's also being held at the clubhouse. For burner safety updates, let's take a look at registration and fees. The activity, again, is not selected. It is something that is entirely optional. I'm not tracking sequence numbers. And the event capacity is limited, but you can see it's a completely different capacity than the event as a whole. We only allow 40 people to sign up for this particular seminar, not 150 as is the event capacity as a whole. Registration is required and we're charging a fee. We're not tracking attendance. For the kids crafting event, again, the activity is not selected. The capacity is a little bit higher because we're accounting for the fact that perhaps a member might have more than one child that they're placing into the crafting event. Registration is required, but we're not charging a fee. So the fee page is going to look very similar to the ice cream social page where it's just listing our registrant types. It's not listing a fee associated with them. Let's go back into our activities and items and take a look at burner safety updates, who can register, because remember, we're actually charging a separate fee for this. So we're charging an extra $3 for members and secondary or tertiary members to be able to attend this particular seminar. So when they add this seminar to their registration, it's going to update that total for them. And then last is going to be the cocktail mocktail party, which is being held at the conclusion of the first day of our safety jamboree. Again, this is an activity, so it has a start and finish time. The location is going to be at a different location than the full event. For registration and fees, again, it's not required. The capacity is back to that full event capacity because it's an activity that's designed for everyone who's registered for that particular event. Registration is required and there is a fee. So let's take a look at who can register and what they're paying. Everyone is allowed to register for this particular activity and there's an extra fee for each person. So because it's a food-related event, I want to ask people about food allergies. When we go to the questions section, I have the ability to add my allergies question. Now, these questions are configured in the Events Manager page. It's essentially a bank of questions that you configure for your events that you choose from when you're creating either a single or a multiple activity event. I want to ask people about allergies. It's going to be visible to all registrants, and I'm going to say that answering that question is required. So let's go back into our activities and items, and let's add an activity and add an item. So the activity that I want to add is going to be our second day seminar that happens in the morning. And I'm going to configure it to start Saturday morning, bright and early at 8 a.m., and it's actually going to go until 10. We'll go ahead and save my changes. Now I have my second day seminar that appears in my list. The location is going to be a different location than any of the prior locations. This is actually going to take place at the club hangar. And these are just locations that have been added to my Events Manager screen. It's a bank of locations that you again can choose from. When you're choosing a location for an activity, you don't necessarily have to choose from that bank of locations. You can choose to type in any location that you'd like. Next up, who can register for that particular activity? Let's say that this is going to be selected. I would like people to show up for this particular item. I'm going to select it by default, but give the member the option to unselect it when they're actually registering. I don't need to track sequence numbers. The capacity of this is limited. Let's say the capacity is 75 people. I want to show capacity and available slots. Registration is going to be required and there's going to be a fee. And I'll go ahead and save my changes. And last, let's decide who can register and what they're going to pay. I would like all of my active members to be able to register for this particular item. The fee is going to be $3 and we'll go ahead and add that. I also have the option to copy registrant lists from another activity. So let's go ahead and remove this and see what happens. Let's say, because it's a seminar, I want to copy the registrant types from the previous seminar, burner safety updates, because I know that for every single seminar I'm holding, it's going to be the same list of registrant types that are allowed to register, active members and secondary and tertiary members. So let's see what happens when I do this. We'll copy the registrant types from burner safety updates. And now I have that exact same list that I saw for my other seminar on the previous day. But let's say that this particular seminar is a little bit more expensive. I still have the ability to edit the fee. It just makes it a little bit easier, skips that extra step for me if it's going to be the same. We'll go ahead and save my changes. And now we have a new activity in our list. Next up, let's add another item. Let's say that every summer we put out a Northwest Balloon Club yearbook, if you will. It chronicles all of the happenings from the last year, any events that we've had, any fly-ins that we've had. We'll go ahead and save that. And this is just an item. It's not something that's appearing at any location. It's not something that someone is physically visiting. It's not something that starts at a certain time. It's just something you can add to your registration. So let's go ahead and take a look at registration and fees. I am not going to select this during registration by default. I'll just give the member the option to choose it on their own. I don't need to track sequence numbers. And I only want to allow them to purchase or add one per registrant. Next up is capacity of the item limited. I'll select no. Maybe I've ordered hundreds of yearbooks and I don't really need to worry about any of those yearbooks running out. Is registration required for this item? Yes. And will a fee be charged? Yes. We'll go ahead and save my changes. And let's select the fee for this. We'll say that only active members can purchase this and the fee is $15. And we'll go ahead and add that and save our changes. So now I'm going to go ahead and say that this particular panel is complete. I have configured a whole set of activities and items for this particular Summer Safety Jamboree. I have activities on the first day as well as one activity on the second day. I have 2 items that are configured. We have configured activities at multiple locations. We have configured some activities and items to be selected by default when someone is registering for this particular event, and some which are going to be optional. And we've set different fees for different activities and items. I'm going to return to the previous page. And then the last option, we'll take a look at cancellation in the release agreement just to show that those items are going to be, again, the same for a multiple activity event as they are for a single activity event. You still can include your cancellation policy. You can still include your release agreement. And I'll go ahead and save my changes. So I am going to log in as Manny Diaz. Manny Diaz is a dedicated member of the Northwest Balloon Club. He attends every single event that they host. He's really excited to attend the Jamboree. He's going to go ahead and register him and his family today. So for the Northwest Balloon Club Summer Safety Jamboree, again, I'm logged in as Manny Diaz. He's just a regular member. So Manny Diaz is looking at all of our description for the event. He's taking a look at who's actually responsible and what they're responsible for. And he can see right from the event details screen all of the activities and items that we've created. So we can kind of get a little preview of what's going on here. He doesn't necessarily have to go into the full registration to see what seminars are being held this year. Do I even want to register for this particular event? How good are the speakers this year? What am I going to do with my children? What are they going to be doing? How much is the yearbook that I can purchase this year? So Manny's fine with all of the details. He's going to go ahead and he's going to register for this event. He is registering himself and a couple of guests. He's going to bring his 2 children. Or let's say he's bringing a child and a family member. He's going to bring his brother. We'll go ahead and hit next. Now we have an active member registration and 2 guests. So let's configure our contact information for our first guest. We'll say that it's Ben Diaz. And ben@email.com is his email address. And next up, we are going to add in Stacy Diaz. Now we get to select the activities for Manny. Manny, without even doing anything, is already checked off for the Jamboree General Attendance. Remember that this is the one item that we configured as being selected and required by default. It's selected, it's grayed out. He can't uncheck it. He can, however, uncheck the item that we selected but did not require, that second day seminar. So it's checked, it's a green check mark, but we can still uncheck it. And you can see that as soon as I check and uncheck it, the registration total at the very bottom is updated in real time. So let's say that Manny's definitely going to the ice cream social. He's definitely going to attend burner safety updates. He can take a look at the details again. He's going to attend that first night cocktail party, but he isn't going to attend the second day seminar, and he does want a yearbook. So right now, we are looking at a total of $43 so far. We'll go ahead and hit next. Now we decide what Stacy wants to do. Now you'll see that Stacy has fewer items which are coming up for her as were for Manny. That's because for registration for some of those events, we didn't allow additional members to be added to that particular item. So you'll see that none of the seminars that we've configured are showing up for Stacy. That's because Stacy is coming up as a non-member. She's not another person in Manny's membership. She can only be registered for the activities which include non-members. So Stacy is definitely going to go to the ice cream social. She's going to attend the kids crafting event, and she's going with her dad to the first night cocktail mocktail party. We'll go ahead and hit next, and if you may have guessed, the next person that we are registering would be Ben Diaz. Ben Diaz is also attending the Welcome Ice Cream Social. He's not going to attend the crafting event, but he is going to go to that first night cocktail party. And now we're seeing that our registration total is at $53. So this is the total for every person in this particular registration. We'll go ahead and hit next. We have that question that we asked our members or our registrants for the cocktail mocktail party. We want to know if anyone's allergic to anything. We have to answer that question for every single person in our list. So Manny is not allergic to anything. Ben's allergic to peanuts, and Stacy's allergic to dairy. We'll go ahead and hit next. We have our release agreement. And now we're at our final registration summary page. So at the very top, we still see those event details. We see our registrants, everyone that we've added to this particular event. And for each individual activity, you see who you have actually signed up in your registration and how much that's actually coming to. So for example, for the first night cocktail party, all 3 of the people in this registration have registered, and we have each individual fee showing up. And at the very bottom, if we complete our registration, we now have to pay for this in order to have the registration go live. I am going to, for the sake of time, log back into the Northwest Balloon Club as Martin Smith. I'm going to go into the control panel and just very quickly apply a payment for Manny Diaz, just so we can see that he is actually registered. And I am going to say that Manny actually paid with cash. So now if I go back into the control panel, into my event calendar, again as an administrator, and I take a look at that Summer Safety Jamboree, and I go into all of the activities that I've configured, I can see who has actually registered. Now when I'm taking a look at my registered column, I can see that 3 people so far have actually signed up for the event. We have a couple people signed up for the ice cream social, and 1 person signed up for burner safety so far. And that is configuring and registering for a multiple activity event. Alan, I'm ready for questions. Fire away.
Yeah, we've got a couple here. They're very interesting questions.
Okay.
Some I know the answer to, some I'm going to scratch my head also. The first question, one of the easier ones, because the answer is no, is can activity leaders, people that are responsible for particular activities, be given a report and only access for the activities that they're responsible for? And the answer right now is no.
No.
Next one might be kind of interesting. It says, we allow people to register their car for parking, but they have to pay a fee. Could I set this up as an item, or do I need a car as a registrant type? And there, I think, a couple of ways of doing it. One is, in effect, you're buying a ticket for parking the car, so you could set that up as an item where somebody has that item. And the other is it could be an activity, just like you're going in for dinner, that's an activity. Parking your car could be an activity. So I think you could set it up either way. Would you think that there's one preferred way or the other?
I don't think so. So the main difference between activities and items is with an item, you're not setting a date and time. If you're hosting a multi-day event And if someone pays for parking registration, it covers all 3 days as opposed to just 1 day. When you're configuring an activity, you're only allowed to select 1 day for that activity. So if someone goes into that activity and in reality they're purchasing parking for 3 days, but it only says 1, that might create some confusion. So a benefit to adding it as an item as opposed to an activity would be to not, make your members think that they're only buying parking for 1 day as opposed to 3 days. Now, if it is just you're hosting an event that lasts from 8 in the morning until 8 in the evening, and it's at a public space where you and your organization are only allowed to park until 8 at night, that's a benefit of that. But it could be either way. It just depends on timing.
Okay.
Also note that for items, you don't set a location. So if you wanted to add in, this is the parking lot or the parking garage that you use, you might want to add it as an activity.
As long as we're talking about that, it says your example had 2 activities on the same date and time with the same location as Clubhouse. This is how do you direct a group to a room or auditorium or patio? So for any given activity, you can set a location by clicking on the little red location item. So it doesn't have to be at the same location as the top level event or as other events. So you might have meeting room 2, or you might have an outdoor event, but then you're meeting at a restaurant for dinner. All right. So it says, okay, since each activity has a date and time, if your event spans multiple days that are not consecutive, how does that appear on the calendar? If you got an activity where you have one activity on, say, June 10th and another activity on June 12th, if so, the activity would appear on the calendar to span all days from start to finish, unless you put in the basic info show only start and end dates on the calendar. So even if there are no activities on like the 11th or whatever, it would still show up as there. So that's one thing you need to do here.
This is Shameen Jackson. That was my question. If I may, I just wanted to follow up why I was asking that.
Sure.
If we're setting up a series of events, say for an example, like a book club meeting, where you might have something just once a month for like 2 or 3 months. So I was trying to debate, and we want them to be able to register one time. So I was trying to figure out if this might be a solution for us where they can, we could set up an item, as she was mentioning, for that.
There's an easier way. There's an easier way, and it's a fairly new piece of functionality. And that is, and this has nothing to do with multi-activity events, you can set up an event with non-contiguous dates. So if you were setting up a class that meets every Thursday for the next 3 months, except on this 1 month, it's going to meet on a Sunday, you can actually set up an event where you can say, here are the dates that it meets on, and you sign up once for the event, like signing up once for a class. So I would take a look at that functionality.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's get on some of the other questions. It says, can you set up registration so that a user can register once and then be eligible to attend multiple activities instead of having them register for each activity? And someone says, you can guess, I already have an activity event that I want to use this for. And that would be much like setting up a track where you're signing up for the technical track or the bunch of particular activities. We do not currently support that. I know it's on the wish list, but at the moment they have to select the activities.
Well, you could configure it to be automatically selected with, again, that option to uncheck the box if they just don't want, if they know that they're not going to attend that particular session. Maybe they have a work call that they have to attend during that time, but to alleviate the extra step of the member physically checking off every one of those items, you could make them selected by default, but not selected and required. Or you could make them selected and required. Selected and required, again, would be that gray check that's automatically checked that the member cannot uncheck.
I think this is more for people that would say, I've got a beginner's track, an intermediate track, and an advanced track.
Okay.
I want to select all of the advanced sessions.
Okay.
And that was me again. That was the same. It was basically the same scenario where I had the event that was happening once a month, and I wanted to register one time. So that's where that question came from. Okay.
Well, but it did blend into this other use case, which was actually pretty good. So listen, I'm thrilled with these questions.
Okay,
All right. So a question here is, can configurations be saved for recurring events and just tweaked once each year? I'll tell you the way I do it on some clubs that I'm actually a member of is I've set up some events for like 100 years from now or 50 years from now, whatever, and they appear at the top of the list. And I've just named them template for a template member meeting or a template party or whatever. And then I simply copy that event and it'll take all of the information. So you see what Samantha is doing here is there's a copy event. And when you copy it, it'll ask you, well, do you want to make one copy? Do you want to make multiple copies? When's the new start date? And so you can do that very easy. And it takes all the information that you've put in there, and then you could go tweak the information. So Samantha is taking the 2020 Jamboree and just making another one for 2021. And now all of those same settings are there very easily. All right. It says, so if something is more than one day, we just create separate activities, one for each day. It depends. An activity right now cannot span multiple days. An activity is a thing that occurs on one day. So yes, you'd make multiple activities. Here's one that Samantha can show. Can you build a multi-activity event and keep it as a draft, meaning that it's not published until you got all the details worked out? You want to show the basic info?
Sure. So under basic information, at the very top, we can change our visibility and we can make the visible date. Let's say this is our 2021 event. I don't want this to be visible until May of 2021.
Right. So you can make it so that only administrators see it, or you can simply say, okay, I've got the thing finished, but we're not opening registration until a particular time. Let's see. The question says, this may be on the scope, but I have a weekly event that goes on for several months. There's a single cost for the entire series of events, but I'd like people to RSVP for specific dates so I know how many people may attend on a specific date. How can I set that up? You would likely have to set these up as individual activities. That sound right?
Yes.
All right. These are all great questions. We know that there are some changes that are coming up, but I can't talk about those yet. So it says, can activity reports be easily reported by different criteria, like alphabetical, badge, member number, etc.? So if you go into any activity, there's a bunch of reports. There's a bunch of reports at the event level and at the activity level. So at the event level, it's for everybody registering for any activity. But if you go down to the event level, so you can look at Samantha's showing a bunch of them there, but if you go into a particular activity, there are reports for that activity, who's registered, and most specifically, people that have answered particular questions. Can you show how to add a food menu to an activity, especially if it's a large menu from a bistro? Do you have a way of very quickly showing how to ask questions?
Yes. So when you are configuring your questions, if it's, asking a member to select a meal option ahead of time, when you are in the Events Manager screen and you configure your event questions, so that bank of questions that you're using to add to either an event or an activity, you can add a question and choose, depending on what type of answer you want. Radio buttons would be allowing the registrant to select one item, whereas a checkbox list would be selecting multiple items off of a checkbox. So if you're choosing a main entree, you would just want to choose radio buttons. We can call this menu choice.
And you might want to have different questions for different restaurants. So if you're meeting at a diner for one thing or at a full restaurant, so this way you could ask the set of questions that's appropriate for the particular venue. And so she's going to go here, asking the questions. We have a video on answer types, which shows that there are 20 different types of answer types, or 20 some odd answer types, and you'll get to see all of these. So this way she's using radio buttons, so people could pick only one of these, as opposed to asking a question where you're interested in multiple things, where it'd be checkboxes, and people could do that. So if she goes back into the event manager, onto this particular event. And go to the questions. Go to the questions tab. Cues. Yeah.
And so if we do, let's say it's our first night that we're actually having a little bit of a dinner, under our questions, we can add, let's see, we have our, I believe I called it our entree question. Nope, menu choice for entree at the steakhouse. And we'll go ahead and save that. So now we have a new question that appears. In addition to allergies, we have our menu choice, which is going to appear as a list of radio buttons, and the member can then choose which one they want per registrant. Because remember, when we were answering the allergies question for Manny, he had to answer that question for each person in his registration, for himself, for Ben, and for Stacy.
So we have one person here that says we use activities for meal selections and understand that it's needed so we can track each meal to order beforehand. It says, plus I think on the back end for payment info versus using items. Any other limitations for items in that scenario? Yeah, because you might have, people might order different dishes, for example. You might have somebody that's ordering pasta doesn't want to pay the same as somebody that's ordering the beef. So there are probably a couple of different ways of handling that. So if you're not sure about how to do some of these things, feel free to contact our customer success team, because they may be able to say, hey, this is the way we know that another club has set this up in a similar situation to you. You don't always have to figure things out one at a time on your own. Reach out to our people. They've got a lot of experience in this kind of things. Mod Moms, one of our longtime webinar attendees, says, we ran 241 events in 2018, and we used the copy function a lot. It says, if you have the time, block out time to find photos to add to the detailed description one time, and when you copy it, all the details and fonts come over. She says, that's a great tool. So there's somebody that's using the copy function a lot. One of the questions is, well, can each entree can have a different cost? Yeah, you probably have to do that as individual items as opposed to just asking questions about one thing. I think we've hit the high points here, and we're running a little bit over on time. So Samantha, you want to wrap it up, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Yes. So again, this is assuming that you've created a single activity event. We do have resources available for those. And note that the waitlist inclusion for multiple activity events is different from the way it functions for a single activity event. So if that's another item that you're considering, I encourage you to watch our webinar from a couple of weeks ago talking about our new waitlist feature. And thank you for joining us today.